In many ways, cruise ships were one of the first places where many of us saw the effects of COVID-19. Our understanding of the virus was in its infancy, but suddenly images of passengers stranded for weeks on these ships began to appear on the evening news. What began as an exciting adventure for many travelers quickly turned into a nightmare situation. And now, 18 months later, the cruise industry is wrestling with how to repair its reputation and rebuild its business. For answers, I turned to Dr. Keri Lestage, Chief Science Officer at Bioplanet, to ask her 4 crucial questions currently facing the cruise industry.
Honestly, time and data. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that the cruise ship, as part of the requirements with the CDCs, they actually have to report the number of cases that they have on board, both in terms of their passengers and with their staff. And what that's doing is that they're able to actually track and generate a data set that they can actually prove that the policies and the strategies that they're implementing are actually being effective. And so I think that's really what's needed. It's not a matter of, it's a prediction. They actually have the real data now to be able to show that everything that they're putting in place is actually working for it. So, it's interesting because the cruise line industry in particular is honestly one of the most sophisticated organizations in terms of infection control in general. They've been fighting norovirus on board for a really long time. You can imagine, they've got massive amounts of square footage. They have to turn over those ships really, really quickly from one group of passengers to the next. They're experts in infection control. And I think that with, we're seeing them implement sort of a multi-prong approach to the COVID situation. And I think that includes everything from really robust testing, making sure that they're able to monitor and isolate when necessary. In our particular case on disinfection and sanitization, to give you an example, Norwegian Cruise Lines, I honestly think is one of the most innovative brands in the industry. They have implemented really novel and cutting edge technologies to help improve their infection control strategies. As an example, they have an on-site generator on board, and what they do is they actually make their own disinfectant actually on board the ship itself. Instead of going out and buying disinfectant, they actually generate it on board. And the way that they do that is they actually take a salt solution and they run electricity through it, and it makes a really, really powerful disinfectant that also has one of the best in class safety profiles. So it's a really, really interesting way of attacking a problem that is also from a efficacy standpoint, from a safety standpoint, is really innovative. They've also taken that solution and they've coupled it with the Bioplanet electrostatic sprayers, which allow them to do the huge amounts of square footage that they have to be able to cover very, very quickly. And that's really been a game changer. We've been in that industry for almost a decade now. And most recently, COVID is an interesting situation in that it's not just surfaces anymore, where now we have to worry about the airborne transmission, which is, I think, part of the reason in the early days when we were hearing some of those horror stories about passengers being stuck on board, is that we really didn't know what we were dealing with, and that airborne transmission really was a tough thing to mitigate. And so since then, again, looking at Norwegian, they've done a whole revamp of their air handling systems, the air filtration. But one of the really interesting things that as we've learned over the last couple of months, is we've been doing some testing with this on-site generation of this disinfectant, hypochlorous acid, plus our sprayers. And what we found is that if you spray that in the air, we can actually eliminate virus out of the air. So we can essentially disinfect both surface and air all in one step by using this technology. So, like I said, it's a multi-prong approach that they're using. But what we're seeing from the data is that they're being really successful. Cruise line industry in particular, you saw the headlines years ago when they would see outbreaks of norovirus, where cruise ships would have to isolate. They've been fighting norovirus for such a long time that they're really sophisticated in terms of their infection control infrastructure that they already have sort of embedded. I think what was challenging about COVID is, one, we really didn't know what we were dealing with. In the really early days, we didn't know how it was transmitted. We had no idea what kind of severity we were looking at, and what we didn't know enough about it in terms of how to really tackle it. And I think that they were in the unfortunate position where you were in a situation where that pandemic hit and you have got people already on board and cases are starting to break out, and you're trying to make strategies on the fly. I think that given the time that it's taken for them to get back sailing, I think they have really been in the forefront to be able to implement some of the most effective strategies. And like I said, the data tells the story. They're winning. I think it's actually a lesson that all of us in the industry can learn from, and that's transparency and communication. I think one of the things that has been really a challenge here is really understanding or trusting, what policies make sense. Are we doing the right thing? Is the solution worse than the actual problem? So I think that there is an element of transparency and making sure that the cruise line industry in particular is communicating with their patrons to be able to say, hey, look, these are all the reasons why we're implementing these policies. And they really have to partner with them. So as a cruise line passenger, you have to have some accountability in protecting your own health and making sure that you're tested and making sure there's good hand hygiene and wearing your mask and doing all those things that is part of preventing this spread. And so I think making sure that they really try to focus on that partnership with their customers, I think all of us can learn something from that approach.